It feels like the times are changing. It feels like all the big AAA games that have gotten announced recently, whether it's The Witcher 4 or Naughty Dog's new game or whatever flavor of the month slop gets regurgitated out of the AAA just machine. No matter what it is, who's making it, what console it's on, how high the critic scores are, it all amounts to absolute disappointment. We know nothing about Witcher 4 at this stage other than the fact that Ciri is the protagonist, and of course, people are calling it out for what it is. It is clearly Western influenced woke nonsense. And everyone's bending over backwards to try and deny this fact at this point. But considering what happened with The Last of Us Part 2, and especially what happened after that, this is reason enough to be concerned. The Witcher is a dead IP, and that's really exciting for me to say because I've hated these games for years. I've hated their fans. I've hated the developers. I hated like the worship that these games have just had thrown at them. But it really needs to be said, going into this generation, right? Where were the good RPGs? Okay, what RPGs did people actually like? What RPGs were people actually playing? What console were they on? Where were the good games this console generation? They weren't on PlayStation. They weren't on Xbox. Nothing is on PC. Mobile didn't explode and destroy the entire industry. What gaming platform far surpassed the others in this regard? It was, of course, the Nintendo Switch. When you really look at what's going on, when you see how much time people put into games like Fire Emblem Three Houses or Xenoblade Chronicles 3, right, you see a very clear trend when it comes to these high budget, longer games. The vast majority of them are played and enjoyed exclusively on Nintendo hardware. Right, these games aren't getting ported to PC. They aren't on Xbox. They aren't on PlayStation. Right, they're all owned by Nintendo-owned brands. Right, they're all Nintendo franchises made by Nintendo developers. Right, that won't ever go multi-plat. Right, it doesn't matter whether you're a fan of RPGs or strategy games or open world games. Like everything is on Nintendo Switch. And it really needs to be said, it really needs to be impressed upon people just how much better something like Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is than Baldur's Gate 3 or Elden Ringling, right? Xenoblade Chronicles 3 by itself mogs both of those games. Now, if you didn't actually play Xenoblade Chronicles 3, there's no way you would know that or understand what I'm talking about. But it couldn't be more clear to me as someone who has played Xenoblade Chronicles 3, who's put 65 hours into it at this point, who's put that much time into this game. I can tell you that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has better pacing, it has better gameplay, better characters, better story moments, more interesting concept setting, and while still retaining a shocking amount of adherence to established continuity and lore, right? It is shocking at how many great callbacks there are to the first two games. And if you haven't played the first two games extensively, you're not going to pick up on all of it. There's this is a very in-depth RPG that will take probably about 100 hours to do everything in, right? But when you do that, you have a very rewarding in-depth experience, and that's just one game, right? When you look at something like Three Houses, which is similar but offers a radically different experience, when you look at The Legend of Zelda, when you look at games like Pikmin 4 or Mario and Luigi Brothership, what you end up seeing, every single one of those games is better than everything else that's come out on every other platform like this gen, right? It's really not even close. And I do think that with Xenoblade and Fire Emblem specifically becoming more and more popular with each iteration, it's going to be really hard to continue downplaying this fact, right? Because if you're sitting there trying to gaslight people into thinking, well, Total Warhammer 3 is the best, no. Like Total Warhammer is not as big as Fire Emblem, right? And you can like try and gaslight people. You can try and make stuff up. You can try and say that like, this. No, like Total War has not evolved at all in the past several years, and to the point where there has been a major controversy about it, right? What does that game do that Fire Emblem does not do better? Right? Like again, when it comes to these strategy games, Nintendo comes out on top. When it comes to the RPGs, Nintendo comes out on top. Just compare the incredible story to Xenoblade Chronicles 3 compared to like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Well, the time Jannies did it. Like, what? Like, they remade Final Fantasy VII and made it worse. Meanwhile, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is making like every iteration, they're inventing entire new worlds and these entire new concepts, exploring all these fantastic ideas and like really delivering fantastic 10 out of 10 payoffs. I almost cried when I beat Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Like that, it was that good. When you compare that to what like inferior developers like Square is doing, when you compare that to what lesser devs like Larian and Bethesda are doing, right? Like, why even bother with these games? Like right now, all anybody does is just like, well, I like Skyrim when it comes out, and I still play it. Well, that was 13 years ago. Do you know how many hundreds of Nintendo games I've played in that span of time? That all of which were way better than Skyrim? Like, it really needs to be said, understood among the general gaming public just how far ahead of the curve that Nintendo actually is. We all know that Zelda beat Baldur's Gate 3. This isn't really like up for debate. Like Breath of the Wild was the biggest game of this generation by far. Nothing else even came close, right? We all know that. But that also extends to a lot of other Nintendo games. Games like Super Mario Bros. Wonder, the best platformer. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, one of the best JRPGs. Mario and Luigi Brothership. This really great, unique little title, right? You have Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. You have like, games like Mario Odyssey, even something as silly as like Mario Rabbids, like in a lot of ways, those games really deliver unique experiences that you will never find on non-Nintendo hardware. When you take all that into consideration, when you look at just the vast array of games that come out on Nintendo hardware, I can't even finish Persona 5. You know why? Because every time I play this critically acclaimed RPG that sold like over 7 million units, this big cultural phenomenon, I get bored. Okay. Persona 5 is not well written. It's not well paced. It doesn't have good gameplay mechanics. It's flashy, but its combat doesn't do it for me. It pales in comparison to Xenoblade Chronicles 3. It paled in comparison to Breath of the Wild. It was like the unholy trinity at that time. Yakuza 0, Persona 5, and Nier Automata. These were the games that were propped up as being like the anti Breath of the Wild, but all of those games have fallen off, right? Those games never even came close to Breath of the Wild success, and they never got a sequel that was as good. Looking at Tears of the Kingdom, like Nintendo is on a whole other level, and the rest of the AAA sphere can't compete with that. And I do think that this fact is going to become more and more apparent the instant that we get the next big wave of new announcements. It might be a new console launch. It might just be a new Nintendo Direct. But this idea that people have had for the past couple of years that Nintendo is slowing down their game releases, they're in for a very, very brutal, rude awakening when they do finally start announcing games. I do think this is going to be it. Like, I do think this is going to be the console generation that puts Nintendo at the absolute peak of the industry, right? Not that they weren't already there, but that's been disputed for some years. And like at this point, it's just going to become an undisputed champion kind of situation. Like nobody can say PlayStation competes with that. Nobody can say Xbox competes with that. Like Nintendo has won the console war.